Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the newest episode of the Student Alliance Speaker Series from Tigger House Foundation. Before we get into today's topic and introduce our guest, who I am very excited to have Monica here with us tonight, don't forget to follow us on social media for notifications of the newest episode and to see more content from us. All right. Well, we are very happy to have everyone here with us tonight. Thanks so much for joining. And Monica, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I know I was thinking about all of the things I wanted to share with everyone over the last couple of weeks. And I was asking myself, I even was asking my kids questions about neurological disorders, because that's the one that really comes to mind, because often when we think about addiction, the road to addiction usually starts well before the actual course of using whatever the substance is. So when we think about, and you hear people speak about this, usually alcohol or whatever the choice of substance is, makes people feel a certain way. So, perhaps it makes them feel better in some strange way. So that's why they do it. They're not doing it because it makes them feel horrible in the beginning. And usually I think what happens is, if you are a person who struggles with some kind of emotion, let's say anxiety, depression, trauma, you're feeling these emotions, and you take some sort of a substance, and for that moment you're not feeling that overwhelming emotion. So that's what really got me thinking, because in my family, I look at all of the different personalities, and I think about my own family, my own children, the children I work with, and I think about all of the pressures in life. So now you have all of these emotions that start at a very young age. You go to a party, you walk in, what do you feel? Sometimes you feel that tightness in your chest. You look around, do you know anybody? Sometimes I've seen children, like girls especially, call other girls because they don't want to walk in alone, because they have that feeling of fear. It's like it makes you stop for a second. So, your heart is racing, your thoughts are racing. And, we do all of these different things to try and feel better from those emotions. And we never really stop to really identify what we're feeling. So I often, when I work with children, or, children are even in high school, but I know you guys really aren't children, but, young adults, I like for people your age to really ask yourself, what am I feeling in a moment? When a teacher calls on me and I don't know the answer, or when I'm just called, when I'm not invited to something and I feel like maybe I was excluded on purpose, or maybe not on purpose, all of these things that happen day to day. If we just stop and ask ourselves, what do I feel? How is this feeling in comparison to other feelings? So sometimes your feeling of anxiety may be a 12. Sometimes your feeling of anxiety might be a 3. So it's also not proportionate. It's not equal. So just because one person is feeling anxious and another person is feeling anxious with the same exact situation, it may not be the same level of anxiety. So that's also things that I think about. So we have these discussions. How are you feeling? Are you depressed? Depression also, or feelings of sadness, they're not equal. So my sadness today may not be equal to my sadness for tomorrow in a different situation. I think about even seasonal sadness, let's call it. It's been raining. If anyone can tell me how they feel when it's raining compared to when it's sunny, do you feel different? Can someone does anyone say they feel different or not so?
Big time. I'll tell you that I rated my Easter candy because it was so rainy and I needed something.
And you see, and it made you feel better.
Yeah, it did for about 10 minutes and then I felt
And then you feel badly after. So we do these things to try and feel better. Sometimes we do nothing and we just lay in bed. And, we have to be conscious of our own emotions. I think that's a huge step for all of us to find a way to live life without necessarily feeling overwhelmed all the time. So those are some of the things that I was thinking about. And then I thought about neurological. How does our brain play into this? So sometimes we think, oh, my emotions. And you'll sometimes have parents. So let's say you're mad. You come home, you throw your stuff, you're screaming, you're just all of this heightened emotion. And then your parents are like, cut it off, cut it out, knock it off. Like, stop crying, stop yelling. And it should be that easy, right? To just be like, okay, I'm going to stop being angry. I'm going to stop crying. I'm going to stop being upset. But it's not really that easy. So you go to school and you're having a moment in class and a teacher will say like, knock it off. You need to stop. You need to. And it's so much easier to be the outsider making those demands on the person in the moment. And then having the expectation that just in some kind of miraculous way, just because the person is telling you to stop feeling whatever you're feeling in that moment, then you're supposed to just stop feeling it. And now all of a sudden you're feeling more upset because now you're thinking, perhaps there's something wrong with me because I can't just stop. But there isn't anything wrong with you in that moment. You're just feeling a feeling. So that's what made me start thinking about the neurological part, the brain part. So can anyone, I want to ask a question. Someone's got to answer it. Who knows what depression is? I'm going to call on you if someone doesn't if someone doesn't volunteer. Let's see. I'm going to call on you. Oh, there she goes, Lauren.
Start to feel sad, like a lot more than just once.
Yep, sad. Sad is a good one. Does anyone feel sad? I know the answer to this. So if you're not shaking your head, yes, I know you're not listening or you're not really being honest. Does everyone feel sad? Yes. Just like everyone feels happy and everyone feels angry and everyone feels scared. So feeling sad is not necessarily a neurological condition. So when we think of depression as a neurological, and we use depression, like, oh, I'm depressed. Like, we use it loosely often, and that's fine. But how do you know when it's truly a situation that you need help? How do you know that? It's because, like Lauren said, you feel it more than once. Yes. Often, if you ask yourself, I'm sad a lot. Right now, I'm sad so much because there's a pandemic. My school year is not what I thought. My freshman year was half of what it was supposed to be. There aren't parties. You're not allowed to, you have to sneak into groups because we're not really allowed. And so you start feeling all of these feelings and you get upset and you feel sad. So that's normal. So there's a situation and then your reaction is sadness. Now, so you could feel sad more than once and it not necessarily being something that you identify as, there's something not quite right here. So I often tell people in my own family, if you can't really identify what it is that's making you sad, like if you can ask yourself what makes you sad, and then you say, my friend didn't invite me, this, and you go down the whole list of things. And at the end of the day, all of that stuff is just stuff, and you still really feel sad. And you can't, it's a feeling that you have all day long. And it's a feeling that you just know isn't quite right. Then it's something that you can actually identify, even though it's hard to identify, but it could be your brain. So that's when I often tell people, if you feel so sad that you can't really grasp why, and it's all the time, and you're feeling really tired, and you no longer have that desire to do the things that you used to want to do. So even if your friend did call you and you're like, you know what, I just don't feel like doing it. I just don't want to get out of bed. I just don't see the end to this feeling. Then it could very well be your brain. And the reason why I bring this up is because often we want to hide because it's a little bit embarrassing, I suppose. Like, I'm always upset, I'm always sad. And then people around you start not really wanting to be around you because you're upset. So now you're trying to camouflage it. And now you want to be the life of the party. So now you're going to pick up a drink and you're going to be more fun. And for that short time, you're going to feel like you're normal. Like, oh, I actually can laugh. I can make jokes. I can get out of bed. And it's a temporary fix. And believe it or not, if people really identified how much the brain affects our emotions, and we weren't so afraid to reach out and say, there's something not quite right here. Just like if somebody has a physical issue and they go to the doctor and they're like, doctor, my stomach is always hurting. And the doctor's like, okay, we're going to give you this treatment plan. And then your stomach doesn't hurt anymore. Believe it or not, it could be almost that simple. If you have the right treatment plan, if people get the right treatment plan and it's followed, all of a sudden the brain is not sending that exact same message. And you can actually make decisions, and you can actually start identifying things, and you can actually start getting out of bed, and you can actually start kind of having those relationships that you used to have. Mm-hmm. So who understands neurology, the brain? I'd love to see if,
Yeah, so my degrees are in psychology. So I'm like nerding out right now, Monica.
I wish I knew this stuff when I was a teenager, because I remember being 15 and I remember being angry at one point. Like, I went through the angry stage. I don't even know why. There was nothing that I could say, like, and I thought I was weird. I was like, why am I so angry? And I remember one point in particular, I think I had a fight with my grandmother, and I think I may have even hit my head with my hand or whatever it was. And then I found myself thinking, I must be crazy. Like, who does that? Like, who just hits themselves because they're angry? And I didn't even know why. Mm-hmm. And I was actually afraid at that time, because I was like, I think there's something wrong with me, because I'm doing these things that make no sense to me. And I'm having these emotions that I don't understand. And if I only knew at that time that it wasn't my fault, that your brain is really sending all of these different things. And for this age group, this particular age group, which always makes me very excited, your brain is developing in such a way that so many things are happening and changing. And if you only knew that like all of these things that are going on are really not my fault, it's all part of developing. It's all part of the brain making these connections that in the next like 5 or 6 years, you'll finally be able to make the type of thinking decisions that aren't so out of control. Mm. And I do believe that it starts probably sometime around middle school. And those are they're really scary years, I think, for adults, for us, and adults that have children your age, because we're always afraid. And I do, with my own kids, I do check-ins. And I don't know if they're telling me the truth or not, but I want them to know, like, if they're acting a little irrational, I'll ask, like, are you doing something that I should know about? Can I help you? Mm-hmm. And I don't want them to ever feel like I'm judging them, because sometimes we do things in a moment that we may not have done in a different moment. But as long as we have somewhere to go where we could get help, and if we're the ones who are helping, like if it's you guys who are helping those around you, the first thing you have to do is have no judgment. Because in order for people to share with you, you have to be able to say, like, I know this person's doing some crazy stuff. I think they're making the biggest mistake of their life. But that doesn't help. In order to help people, you can't really impose your views. So if you're in a better space in your head, by being the person who's kind of the expert in the moment. You have to be vulnerable and you have to allow them to share and then help them feel that there is hope, because there's always hope. And I always tell everybody, there is always hope. No matter what photo you accidentally posted on social media that everyone's told you it's forever going to damage the rest of your life and you're never going to get into the school or get the job. Okay, you know, these things happen. Like, should you have done it? No, but it's too late. Once you did it, it's too late. You can't beat yourself up over the fact that you did it. And no matter who tells you that you made the biggest mistake of your life, you should also forgive yourself and tell yourselves. And if you're the ones who are forgiving your friends, you could be the person who could secretly be like, listen, it's all right. Stuff happens. Like, you got to move on. You know, you got to move on. So now I wanted to ask you guys about the pressures you feel to be like number one, because you guys go to all these fancy schools. And I bet you there's a lot of pressure. And coming up in September, you know, you guys have to start thinking about, you know, where are you going? You got to do some college visits. Are your counselors starting to talk about that stuff? Yeah. Does anyone have an idea or no? No. Let me tell you, if you don't have an idea, that's okay. That's okay. And yeah, I was curious how our friend over here on the bottom right, who's at Raritan, how did you end up with the Student Alliance? Because you're like the one kind of off to a different, you know, a different type of school, like in a different area.
Yeah, so I found out about the club through, so we have a list like extracurricular activities, and I was just looking through and I was like, oh, this kind of seems interesting. So we went through and I got the link to come tonight. So I was like, let me just listen in and
So is this your first meeting?
See what everyone has to say.
Is this your first meeting, Ben?
Yes, it is.
Wow.
Yes, it is.
Carly, how did the link go out there to these schools? Are they across Monmouth County? And
Yeah. You know, everyone is invited to attend and kind of get to know a little bit about what we're doing and join us. So we allow everyone in, all are welcome, and really all ages as well.
that's phenomenal. Now, I have a question for Ben, because I know nothing about Raritan High School. I know a lot about Middletown schools and other areas right over here in our general vicinity. But do you have that pressure as well at your high school to know what colleges you're thinking about by next year and all of those kind of things, like, you know?
I don't know if it may be intense a pressure as it would be elsewhere. But I mean, you just kind of go on your own path, and you just kind of have to realize that, you know, people are going to have different places for college, and people are going to have different career paths, but you just got to kind of stay in your own lane and just realize what your place is and just go from there.
Do you have peers that ask you often, like, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? Or
I mean, kind of. I kind of talk about it with my friends a little bit, like where everyone's kind of headed in life after high school and who's going to the workforce, who's doing like grade, who's, you know, maybe not even going to college. So we all kind of have those discussions. But everyone's just kind of, you know, separate in their own little bubble.
That's great.
different, right?
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, very, very interesting. I think it's phenomenal. So I grew up in an inner city. I grew up in Jamaica, Queens, which I don't know if anybody even knows where that is. But yeah, someone down here. What is your name? Shaking your head, Matt? No, you're not Matt. Matt's next to you. You're
Me, Michael.
Yeah. Michael.
I used to live in the city, and my parents grew up in Brooklyn, so I'm familiar with Jamaica.
Okay. Yeah, it's the kind of place that you drive through really, really fast, because you never know if You know, there's going to be somebody shooting and there might be a stray bullet that accidentally gets you.
Yeah.
So by the time I was in high school, I was held up at gunpoint twice. So growing up, the things that I had a hard time identifying with my own kids because my kids, you know, were born here in Monmouth County. We're in Atlantic Highlands. It's very safe. You know, they don't have to worry about walking down the street and getting jumped. That was the word, you know, back then. I don't know nowadays what they call it. But it was just different. So the pressures were very different. And I think that for a long time, I didn't have the understanding of what children nowadays, the pressures that you guys have are so different. The things that we were, the pressures that we were more basic. How are we going to buy the things we need to buy? Because there was no way I was going to ask my mom. She was a single mom and she had 2 little girls, and she was working 3 jobs to just buy food. So there was no way I was ever going to ask her for money for clothes or anything like that. So our survival was different. We were really, and my kids sometimes tell me that I was lucky because we didn't have to wonder, like, I didn't realize that your senior year, the big thing is the sweatshirt picture, the signing, the college,
Oh.
can anyone tell me, is that, you know, do you think about like what sweatshirt you're going to wear for the photo for the seniors or no? Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I was like, wow, like that's a pressure, but it's a real one. And even though for someone like me, I'm like, why do you care? You know, I'm more like Ben, like you just stay in your own lane. It's not like that for a lot of kids. There's a lot of judgment from peers. You know, the sports, who's in sports? I'd love to see who's in sports. Lauren, okay. What sport do you play? Who's this young man next to Lauren? I don't know your name. I'm sorry.
Is that Dan?
Dan?
Yeah, I'm Dan.
Dan, nice to meet you. What sport do you play?
I play rugby.
Rugby. That's an aggressive sport, right? Dangerous?
Yeah, a little dangerous. It's fun though.
That's good. What position do you play?
I play outside center, so I'm a back, which is like usually the smaller guys. So it's less tackling, but more getting tackled.
Do you do like training outside of your sport as well? Like private type of training? Do you have a coach?
I do. Well, we have practices every day. I just play at CBA because they're kind of like the only team in the region. So we have practices like pretty much every day after school.
Do you wonder if you're going to play in college? Is that a goal or not at all?
I'm not focused on like playing in college as like recruitment or anything, but if there's like a club at the place that I'm going to, that'd be fun.
That's wonderful. So does anyone, and I think that that's probably the healthiest way to play a sport for children in terms of mental health. Of course, if you're a competitive athlete and that's really where your focus is and your passion and your drive, then that's great too. But sometimes the pressure to be the best is a lot for people your age. And sometimes we spend a lot of time focused on things that years later we could look back at and say, what in the world was I thinking? What were my parents thinking? Like, did it matter? Did it matter? And, you know, you have to be okay with yourself with all of these things. Like you should check in on yourself, be also a good friend to those around you. You know, when you have those connections, I often tell people, you know how you meet people along the way and sometimes you have these friendships that just click instantly. You really feel like you've known the person forever. And then you have the friends where you hang out in the groups because that's the group that everybody else is hanging out with. And there's some people in the group that you're just like, I'm not really sure about this person, but I'm going to hang out with them because they're part of the group. You know, be a good friend to those that you connect with. even in that big group. And I think that that's important because you'd be surprised if you're honest to those around you that you actually like and you connect with, they won't be honest with you back. And sometimes we don't even realize that those around us actually share a lot of the same thinking that we have. They're just not going to say it because they're afraid. They may be afraid that it's not a popular thought, that it's not a cool thought. And once again, these are more pressures that we put on ourselves. That is really incredible to me that I see with people your age. All right, so we were talking about neurological, the brain and the neurology of the brain. And I was going to ask, I forgot her name again.
Michaela, probably.
Who is it?
Is it Michaela?
Michaela, yes, but it looked like.
Sorry.
What is your understanding of the neurology of the brain with, let's say, neurological disorders? Like the most common ones, I think, are anxiety, which everyone can identify with, depression, which I think everyone can identify with. Has anyone ever been diagnosed with ADHD here? No, that's a big one. Maybe you guys are a little bit on the older side, but that's a big one right now for kids. My son's age, like 12, and they start identifying it now in school at like 4.
Oh, it goes even lower. I work with kids with autism, and not me, my boss, like we diagnose kids like little now.
Right, which is fascinating to me. And I'll give you my opinion on that after, but go ahead, tell me what your understanding is.
So in undergrad, I originally wanted to be like a pediatric neurologist back in the day. And then I switched over to clinical psych. So I did a lot of like neurology based classes, and all my labs were neuro based and neurons and dopamine and like all that. And then I switched over to autism. So now I'm on like that neurological side of that. Yeah.
I know autism is incredible.
Yeah.
And they're people too, they're people. And it's phenomenal to see that. So I make connections with people with autism, which I think I'm so lucky that they let me into their world. And I've come to realize that their world is pretty cool, and we're always bringing them out of their world and making them be in our world. And we really force them because we want them to be productive individuals in society and be able to go out to dinner with us and do all of the things that we do. But sometimes I feel for them because I'm like, you know what? Why do they have to always do what we want them to do? Why can't we kind of, every once in a while do what they want to do? And if they want to walk around, and do the self-stimming, and they like it, it's not necessarily always a terrible thing. So anyway, so you were talking about dopamine. Does anybody know what dopamine is here? You never heard of it?
It's a chemical in your brain.
And what does it control?
Like your happiness.
Isn't that incredible? Did you all know that there are chemicals in the brain that control happiness? You do know. It's amazing. So if you're not happy, if your brain is not producing that chemical properly, and you're feeling this horrible feeling, because it really is like lead. It's like having just lead on you all the time, and you have to do the things that everybody else does without lead. It's really unfair. And now I decide, you know what? I don't want to feel like lead today. I'm going to go for a drink because it makes me feel like the lead is off, even if it's just for an hour. But then what happens with the alcohol? Is it in your body forever, or what ends up happening? It goes away. So now I need to have it again because now I feel like lead again. And now I need to have some more. And I want to always feel this feeling. So if you are on the right medication, and I hate to say you can't cure depression with a pill because it doesn't really work that way. But if I were to tell you that if you went to the doctor and they told you, like if you felt like this, if you felt like you had lead all the time on your body, just carrying lead, and you went to the right doctor and they treated you properly with, let's say, a medication on top of some other treatments, and you no longer felt this horrible feeling, would you believe it? Do you believe it? I'm going to ask each and every one of you, do you believe that if the right treatment is available, that it would actually make those feelings stop? All right, I'm going to start over here. I guess, I don't know if Kira's still in, but we'll go from Kira to the right. Carly, help me. I don't know the names.
I'm sorry, my computer is like being weird. Were you talking to me?
No, that's okay. I did. If you didn't hear, I didn't want to.
Going in and out.
That's okay. If I told you that if a person who had depression went to the right doctor and got the right treatment to help that dopamine problem and that brain problem, would you believe that that feeling of heaviness and ultimate sadness could actually get better? Do you believe it? Yes or no? Kira, what do you think?
It like could get better, but there's like gonna be times where there's like downfalls, and like it's not just ultimately gonna just like be amazing. Like you're still gonna have like the depression for the rest of your life and like learn how to deal with it and stuff.
So you're right. And what sometimes medication does, the right medication, the right treatment, is it gives the person who's feeling it just enough to be able to now take the next step, and then be able to take the next step. And part of it is, yes, possibly talking to someone. If you find the right person to talk to, you'd be surprised. I mean, I think it doesn't necessarily, just go away, but I think people could live a very, very comfortable life and not feel that overwhelming feeling. And I do want to say that now, because of the Zoom and all of this telehealth, I have many clients that they go to college and they're having a moment. They're able to call the person that they check in with. So they could be in two different states. And now they don't have to find someone new who they never met and they don't have a history with. And it's amazing. It's amazing, because sometimes you just need to check in with somebody. Now, medication, do you think you always have to be on it forever? So I asked Kira. I'll ask our friend next to Kira.
Is that Matt? If you hover over the square, their name will come up.
Oh, thank you. Oh, Frankie. Frankie, do you think you have to be on medication forever?
No. I think that you can learn to like cope with it and find like new mechanisms.
Yep. So sometimes some of my clients will start a medication if they're in a really deep, I call it a hole. When you're in a deep, deep hole, I don't think there's a choice. When you're in a hole where you feel like you can't get out, I instantly encourage my clients to see their primary care physician. That's usually the quickest route to help. And then at the same time, I encourage them to find someone that they can talk to. And then shortly after that, it's really incredible because children your age, they've told me often that within like a few months, they're cured. And I'm not saying that they are cured or not, but they feel better. And that's fine, to be able to identify how you feel and be able to have control over your treatment and be able to say, wait a minute, I feel like I'm in a hole again, and it could be 2 years from now. And then, it's good for that person to say, oh, I remember what I did, and they can do it again. Anxiety. Who could, let's see, I'm going to hover over. I'm going to call you. I'm sorry. Allie, do you know what anxiety is?
I think it's just like being like nervous.
Yep, nervous. I'm going to ask you guys, I want to hear what makes you nervous. Molly, what makes you nervous?
When I'm about to take like a big test or a big quiz that I'm kind of scared if I don't know if it's going to go well.
Now, why does that make you nervous?
Because I want to do well, and sometimes I don't know if if I'm prepared.
Okay. Now, if you didn't do well, how would you feel?
I'd be kind of upset.
Now, what do you think would happen if that one time you didn't do well? Like, what does your brain tell you? Because you're feeling these things because your brain is actually telling you these things. You're convincing yourself, like, oh, this is, and it's that feeling, that extra feeling. So what is that extra feeling that you're telling yourself? Like, what do you think, that you'll never be able to get a job, that you're going to get kicked out of school, that you're not going to be on honor roll? What is it that you tell yourself?
That it's kind of going to like affect my whole average grade.
And do you look at it as all 4 years? Are you afraid that that one test may affect the average and then affect your overall average, or you don't go that far?
No, I don't go that far.
That's pretty good. Good for you. Good for you. So that might be a healthy anxiety. That might be a healthy anxiety. For some people, they may actually, believe it or not, I mean, there might be some of you when they're there thinking, oh yeah, I thought this, that if you have one bad test grade, that it will affect everything. And now it just paralyzes you. So let's see. Ben, what gives you some fear? Like, what are you afraid of?
I'd agree with the standardized test because I have one in 2 days and I'm not too stressed about it, but you kind of think long term about how it's just going to affect what you're immediately thinking about in terms of the next year of school and college and beyond. So you just kind of have those thoughts rushing in and putting in all that work throughout the school year, and you want it to pay off with your test score.
That's a healthy anxiety. I think that's a healthy fear. So now let's talk about when you have a fear, and let's say your worst fear, which is that you don't do too well in the standardized test, and then all of a sudden it impacts all of these other things. So let's say that fear happens. Do you have a backup plan? Do you have a backup plan, Ben, or no?
I don't, well, it kind of depends, because if you're taking like an SAT, for example, like you can always retake an SAT, and just try and do better the next time and study more or review the things you're not necessarily the strongest at. But something like an AP test that you can't always take again, you kind of don't really have a backup plan. You just kind of have to accept that, you didn't maybe put your best foot forward, or you can just try and improve maybe on the next AP test you take, but don't try and look at it as like the end of the world, like it's gonna ruin the rest of your life.
Excellent. So that's a healthy kind of anxiety fear to have. So we need to have some of these anxieties in order to survive. So if you're crossing the street and it's a really fast traffic and there is no traffic light and you're like, all right, am I going to make it? And your body's feeling all of these things like, oh my gosh, I'm feeling this, I shouldn't be crossing. That's survival. Like your body, it's a healthy fear to have. So that's excellent. So I do tell people often, try to give yourselves, start practicing on the backups. So you ask yourselves, what is my fear right now? Why am I feeling so afraid? Okay, what if the worst case scenario happens? It can't be the end of the world. What can I do after? If I don't get into the school that I absolutely need to get into, what's my alternative? And then you also need to start telling yourselves the alternatives aren't necessarily terrible. They're not necessarily just an alternative. So there's a positive to having these plans, because then you start learning some really good skills as you get older, that it doesn't have to be so devastating when your actual fear of whatever the situation is, and it happens. Matt, are you still there? Hi, Matt. Do you have a fear? I'm gonna say you don't have any fears, right?
When I'm at work and like I do something wrong, it's pretty scary.
What do you do?
I work in takeout at a restaurant.
And what do you so what can go wrong?
Okay, so like last weekend, I did some guy's like order totally wrong, and I had to refund it, and like he spent $100 that he shouldn't have. So yeah, that was scary.
And now what was the result on you? Did you have to pay for for the mistake?
My boss figured it out, but like I was really worried that I was going to have to.
That's a good fear to have. I think that's a genuine fear. So that fear, do you think it was that you have some responsibility in that? Is that what the problem was for you?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is a healthy fear to have. I know it's a horrible thing, Matt, but those are experiences that we have that are super painful. That then the next time that you have some big order like this, guess what your brain is going to tell you? Because now you've trained your brain to have this fear, like, oh my gosh, like I got to make sure I don't do this again, because next time I may end up having to pay $100. So that's a healthy fear to have. And I bet you it'll make you better. So sometimes the worst case scenario needs to happen in order for us to learn these valuable things and these feelings that we have that we actually don't want to feel again. So you probably never want to feel that fear again, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you won't. I have a feeling that you're always going to get the order right. Michael, what is your fear?
I would say not performing at work or meeting the goals that are set before me at work.
You're a high achiever, huh? You have put a lot of
I
pressure
guess
on.
so.
What is your job?
Well, currently I'm in wealth management at Merrill Lynch. Right now I'm studying for the Series 66. So I guess you could say my biggest fear is passing the Series 66.
Wow. I have a feeling you're going to pass. I don't know.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's a healthy fear to have as well. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Dan, do you have any fears?
My biggest fears right now are pretty much just college admission stuff. Like a lot of like if I'm doing enough extracurriculars or if my grades are high enough, because like there's a lot of pressure from like a lot of different people. So, and most of the pressure is from me, I guess. So, just like not disappointing myself or like everyone around me.
I like to tell this story, which my kids hate that I tell them this story to people, but I like to tell people because I just do. So I grew up as, I was the product of a single mom in Jamaica, Queens. My family came from Venezuela. They were immigrants and they didn't speak any English. My mother's ultimate goal was for herself to get an education. She was only 21. So she was just a few years older than you guys are, with 2 kids in a country that she didn't know anything about, didn't know the language. And she had never gone to college because back then, as a woman in Venezuela, that wasn't really what families encouraged. They encouraged her to get married to a doctor much older than her. And she was in a relationship that she didn't feel good about herself. So she did the brave thing, which was leave. And I give her so much credit for doing that. And what she instilled in us was the importance of education. She got herself an education. We took advantage of being in this country and we got an education, but we didn't have the guidance that often you guys have because, my mom was busy learning English and going to school herself. So we kind of had to figure it out in the best way possible. And in my high school, not too many people went on to higher education. High school was generally it. Often they either dropped out. Lots of my peers died early. They were either killed or, there was a lot of violence in my area, a lot of unhealthy lifestyles, that kind of stuff. So I knew that I didn't have a choice, but I also didn't know how to study for these big exams. And I was afraid. I was afraid of taking the big dreaded SAT. So I took the route that I thought was the path of least resistance, which was a community college, which I tell my one daughter who graduated from RBC, and she was really afraid of where she was going. And I said, you know what, honey, worst case scenario, worst case, which is not worst case, you take that year, go take some classes at the community college and kind of figure out what it is you want to do. And it was like, I told her that, I don't know, she had to go somewhere horrible. And I was just like, what is it? Why? And she said, it's just the pressure of having this big name school. So I went to Queensborough Community College. It took me 3 years, which should have taken me 2 years, but I always say I spent 1 year at the beach. So I had to pay the price. And then I loved having an education. I was like, wow, this makes me important. I felt good about myself. So I said, I want to keep doing this. And I found psychology. It was between law and psychology. And I got straight A's in law, and I got, C's and D's in psychology. And, my counselor said, you shouldn't be going the psychology route because your grades are not necessarily, if that's your major, it doesn't look good. And of course, I was going to show them because I was stubborn. That's what I want to do. And you know what? I did show them because I ended up getting a full scholarship to St. John's University, completed my 2 years there in the time that was allotted. I was a straight A student. I had a very high GPA. It was back then it was 3.89. So I graduated with the Loudies, which it didn't mean anything to me. And I got offered a full scholarship at Fordham University. Go figure. They gave me $30,000, which I bought a Hyundai. I'll never forget. And then I had all this money. I was like, what should I do with this money now? So be gentle on yourselves. It's okay. If it doesn't go exactly the way you think it has to go, and everyone else seems like it's going that way, you know what? I promise you it's going to be okay. And you guys seem like you're going to do some amazing things. This is an awesome group, Carly. I want to hear what Carly's fear is.
Oh gosh, I was thinking about this and I knew you were going to ask me.
I was going up the line.
I don't know. It goes pretty deep probably. And that's just because I help people who are struggling with addiction and alcohol. I think my biggest fear is that anyone struggling with addiction gets the help that they need, but they stay on their path of recovery and their journey. Even if there is a slip up or a set path, it doesn't need to be perfect. There just needs to be some progression and, doing the next best thing. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about as my fear, but I think it's my fear for others. So, yeah.
I understand. And I'm sure you do a lot of self-reflecting.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to. And it's extremely rewarding to be able to help others, but exhausting too. So, but there's so much good to talk about. We always focus on how many are overdosing and how many are not doing well and are homeless on the streets due to drugs and alcohol. But we really should talk more about how many people reach out for help, because so many people are reaching out. So it's super important that we do focus on that as well and celebrate that. So,
I mean, I know I reached out to you for a friend of mine who reached out to me, and she's almost 50 years old, and it's someone that I knew since I was 12. And the way she reached out to me was she was embarrassed. She's a mom.
Yeah.
And she lives in Long Island in a very suburban community. And she was just so embarrassed that she ended up in this situation. And I was like, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. You know, you're telling me. And she said, she's like, I don't want to feel like this anymore, because she no longer could get out of bed. She no longer could take care of her kids the way she wanted to. It was taking over her, and she wasn't recognizing herself, and she didn't think she was a good person anymore. So it's amazing, because the substances that are out there, even as basic as alcohol, and then it moves all the way up, it can affect the way we think about ourselves. So we need to keep that in check, because we're pretty awesome. And no matter how much we may tell ourselves throughout, different times in our lives, like, I'm no good, I'm not good enough, you have to then counteract that with the good. And there's something, and I'm going to leave it at this, because I think I spoke a whole lot. There's something which I've recently, I guess over the last 10 years, I really started practicing. And I'm really interested in going this route again, which is cognitive behavior therapy. Does anyone know anything about it? You can train your brain, guys. So if you tell yourselves, let's say, I'm going to make it super basic, because I've done this with some of my students. There was a little girl who never smiled, super artistic. She reminded me of like a version of like Billie Eilish, super artistic, unique, didn't fit in her high school. She thought she was the only person in the world that was like herself, like, because she didn't look like everybody else, and she didn't think like everybody else, and she didn't act like everybody else. She thought there was something wrong with her, and I always told her, you're just super fabulous that you haven't met your people yet. They happen to not be in your high school, but there are people out there just as fabulous as you. And she really had a hard time believing that, but this girl never smiled. Never. Not once, ever did she smile. And I asked her one day, I said, can you smile? And she says, I don't smile. I'm not capable of smiling. And she was severely depressed. And she had a lot of emotional issues. And I think she had a lot of biological issues in her brain, for sure, that were causing so much turmoil for her. But she really was incredible in her art. She could draw these paintings that were just unbelievable, so passionate and so talented. So I said, you know what? We're going to practice. We're going to teach you how to smile. And she was like, she just like, no. And we started practicing every single day. I said, I want you to think about smiling. So she would close her eyes. She'd think about smiling. I said, I want you to force yourself, physically force a smile. And she did. And I said, how do you feel? And she says, horrible. I said, okay, now you're going to tell yourself, you're going to smile, and you're going to tell yourself it feels great. And that's how you start. So I would love for you guys to try it out with something like, say, a food. Like if you really hate a food, I had a friend who tried it with a watermelon, and she would gag every time with watermelon. And I said, I want you to learn to love watermelon. It's going to be that simple. And she was like, you're crazy. And I said, no, let's try it. And in one summer, she loves watermelon. Yes, but it's a thought. And your thought, you'd be so amazed at how much you teach your brain a certain thing. You tell it to yourself over and over and over. You eventually believe it. And now all of a sudden it becomes like a permanent thing, and it doesn't have to be. So you should try it with something. And I'd be surprised next time if I get to see you guys again, if it worked. I did it with, I do it all the time, when I have time. You have habits. So if you always sleep in the same side of the bed, force yourself to sleep in the other side. And you'd be amazed, like all of a sudden, like at first you're uncomfortable, and then you're like, I'm going to I'm going to stick through this and I'm going to do it. And it's so basic. And when you learn to do it with basic things, you realize that you can do it with big things. And it gives you power, because there's power in you being able to control the things that you're telling yourself. I wanted to know, Amy, what's your fear?
I have many fears.
Are you anxiety ridden?
I am. You know, I'm a mom. I have 10-year-old twins. Working at Tigger House and hearing stories, and I constantly worry about them. I have one child who's diagnosed with ADHD. You know, that is my number one thought every single day is, am I leading them down the right path? Am I saying the right things? Am I, you know, nurturing their spirits and helping them grow as individuals and not try to fit in? That's my biggest fear.
Sounds like you're already on the right path.
I hope I go to therapy every other week. I love it. My husband always jokes when I come home from my therapist, we have these incredible conversations, and he just looks at me and goes, "You saw Beth today, didn't you?" And it's like the biggest joke in the house, but it took me a while to find the right therapist, but she's life-changing for me.
And that's the sad part, that unfortunately, you know, people may have not the best experience with the first one, and then it kind of turns you off. And sometimes you need to go through 4 and 5 before you find the right one. So, yeah, I mean, you know, obviously I'm a big supporter of therapy. And I don't think it has to be every week at first. So one student that I worked with that was in significant distress, and it stemmed from the pandemic. So there are sometimes things that kind of catapult it. I think she struggles with, you know, depression to, you know, generally, but she could function just fine. And the whole pandemic relationship issues with her friends, where she was kind of cut out of a group that she was always part of. And then a feeling of betrayal from her closest friend, all kind of pushed her in that hole where she really needed help. And she started therapy and medication. The medication instantly, the therapy was instant as well. And that was twice a week to start. And then it started going down to once a week, then once every 2 weeks. And she was just like, I don't need it right now. And, you know, she'll check in every once in a while, once a month or whatever. And she's fine, you know, and she's not really interested in talking about all of those things anymore. She's just like any other normal, you know, 16-year-old teenager. She's like, that's pretty annoying to talk about right now. So I'm like, that's fine. That's fine. And that's what you want to hear. You know, you want to hear that. And you know what? Kids don't forget, you know, they don't forget. And they know that if they need it, it's there. But you don't have to harp on it and live it all the time. If you're not in it, great. And you can always feel like, hey, if I need it, I need it. And sometimes we fall, we make mistakes, forgive ourselves. You know, those are the things that I really encourage for people. And if you start young, you'll be amazed. You'll be in way better shape by the time you're my age.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Monica.
Oh, my pleasure, Carly.
Does anybody have any comments or questions or anything they want to share with Monica? We will make sure that we share her contact information in case you want to reach out to her on your own. But if you have anything to say, go for it.
I want to say thank you to all of you guys for sharing your time with me. It was fantastic.
Monica, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I love so many of the things that you
Fear,
said.
Carla. You must have a fear.
Oh, I was trying to sneak out. I thought we were done. You know, and as I've gotten older, I think, and the fears become more about like health, your family's health, because I think we get to a point that we know we can face our fears. And as you said, I do believe that a lot of fears are normal and rational. And I rely on my faith a lot to get me through fears. So I think for me, as I get older, unfortunately, it's more, I worry about my parents' health, my children's health, all that kind of stuff. So it's very different and I do feel for our students, because I think sometimes I look at it and I go, oh, those aren't fears. An SAT, getting into college, everything's going to be fine. It'll all work out. But I think when we were there, yes, they were very real. The pressures are there, the anxiety is there. But I think as you get older, you look back and you think that was nothing, but they are real.
Carla, I work with some adults in school settings that really take their fears to a whole new level when it comes to their children. And I often do take a step back and wonder, like, oh, they didn't do the work when they were younger and they should have done the work. They were like, the 5-year-old doesn't read yet and they're never going to read. And so it can start from a young age. And, we as adults impose our fears sometimes and our irrational thinking on our own children. And then our children start getting older and they absorb that. And then they start having these irrational fears. Like, believe it or not, if one of the parents, sometimes one of their biggest fears is that their child is never going to learn how to read. So children who are struggling, parents who have struggling readers, that's a real fear. Absolutely. And you want every child to be able to read that can. I often tell families who reach out to me privately, go, what's the worst thing that could happen? And then the person will say that my child is never going to learn how to read. I go, how lucky are we though right now that you could have books read to you? If this person never learns how to read, it's going to be okay. Like, it's going to be okay. But it's our job as the adult to be confident, to let the children feel safe, that they're going to be okay. And that's the one big thing that I try to teach adults who, I was a victim of it too, that we forget that we have to put ourselves in check. Otherwise, we are imposing these things on our children, and they deserve better because the pressures of the world are so difficult. And quite honestly, like Carla said, what's a true fear would be the child who has a diagnosis of cancer. So let's, when you really look at it that way, it's okay. And I tell parents often, and I tell, people who do contact me, we are going to do everything as adults to help. And, you have to be an advocate for the children, and you have to get them into all of the services, and you have to try your best. But let's say the worst case scenario happens, it's actually not so bad, as long as the person, the child, knows that he or she will be okay. If you tell him or her they're going to be fine, they're going to be like, I don't read. So what? The books read to me.
I love that. I guess, as we do get older, I'm a big fan of don't let these anxiety or fears take up space in my head. Don't let them rent space in my head. They don't pay me for that. Let these thoughts in, let them go. We're going to have these thoughts, but you don't have to hold on to them forever. And I'm a big fan of this too shall pass. And I love, Monica, how you really highlight it's going to be okay. Because we do always find a way to figure it out, or we find the right person to connect someone with, to make it right, to figure it out, to help. And at the end of the day, believe it or not, someone else is going through the same thing as you are, or a very similar situation, and they're afraid to speak up about it. But you're the one that has the courage to talk about it and maybe get the help and work through it. So that's kind of what I'm taking away with many other things, trying to think what I could train my brain to do. So I'll get back to you on that. It's probably like not eat sugar or something like that.
That's something different. I think that's a little bit different. It's really something that you're averse to or you really prefer not to do. So let's say you prefer not to eat something at a certain time of day because you have this fear that it's or drive down a certain road, like, oh no, I'm not going to drive down this road. And you're going to do it. You're going to do things that you generally don't do. And what it starts helping you realize is you can do things that you're normally not comfortable doing. And you can train yourself to be okay with these things. And change is not a terrible thing sometimes.
Yeah, no, you're right. Change is good. So I'll get back to you on that. I am going to think a little bit about that because I think it's important. And if anybody else is going to try to do something like that too, we can report back to Monica. I think that's really cool.
I would love to see if it worked.
Definitely. All right, well, before we wrap up tonight's speaker series, I just want to remind everyone to follow us on social media. The links to all of our pages will be included with our posts, so make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Once again, Monica, we really would love to thank you and hope to see you again. I know we will. Thank you for joining us today and talking with our students. You did get them to talk a little bit, but I know they have a lot more to share with you when we're in person. I'm sure it's just much easier to connect that way. But stay tuned for our next Student Alliance speaker series. That is May 17th at 7. We have Mitch Ansell and Chris Decker. So we're excited to have them as part of our speaker series. And if anybody has anything else they want to add, if not, we'll wrap up and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you. Have a good night, guys.
Awesome.
Hey,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a good night.
Good
Good night, everybody. Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks so much.